Salam and peace. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. Muslim Network TV always there on Galaxy 19 satellite, as well as on Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and a lot of social media, but always on muslimnetwork.tv as well. This is the first Muslim television in America in English language in which Muslims are hosts, and they are talking with our neighbors. All the time it happens. What is happening to Islamophobia? Have you heard about it lately? It seems that, many of the hate mongers are just Islamophobes like Pamela Geller and Robert Spencer and David Yerushalmi are looking for something to do, because I checked Google News this morning, not much about them. They used to be all over creating hate against Muslims. It seems that the hate mongers have now learned about other forms of hate, or maybe they have discovered intersectionality. So when it comes to hate against blacks, along with hate against Muslims, and cheering supporters of building a wall on the southern border, or cheering a ban on poor refugees from around the world, and defending icon of Confederacy all around. So our opposition to wearing masks. I mean, that's where Islamophobes are busy, discovering intersectionality of hate itself. I think I'm the one who coined the term intersectionality of hate. Normally, people used to use term intersectionality in terms of people positively trying to change the world. In the meantime, Islamophobia has gone international. Coined here, probably books written here about it, but China is using the same Islamophobia and hate and has created the largest concentration camps since the Nazis, where the Uyghur people are forced to do free labors. And I have met some of those people who came out and have horrible stories to tell about those concentration camps. And India, well, land of Gandhi and land of Taj Mahal, nobody cares for those things, as it has now 2 genocide alerts. And they are saying citizenship will be good for Hindus, but not for Muslims, and reoccupation of Kashmir, all saying they are fighting terrorism and extremism. Actually, they have coined the term and hashtag Corona Jihad, and blaming pandemic on Muslims. While China and America are blaming each other, they're blaming directly Muslims there. And I was in International Court of Justice in Hague, Netherlands, watching in the court Aung San Suu Kyi, the leader of Burma, and she was shamelessly defending the genocide against Rohingyas there. I don't think not many people were tuned into what she was saying, but people are doing that. So international Islamophobia has left America in somewhat ways, but gone international, creating hate in a bigger way. And in the midst of all of this, there is a Catholic who left a monastery and got into an island and dedicated himself building bridges of understanding among Christians and Muslims. And this unique person probably is the only person in America who has written, who is consulted not only by Muslim organizations, but governments around the world. And he has probably written more books, more scholarly books on Islam and articles than probably anyone else in the United States. When people think of John Esposito, they think of Islam. Welcome to Muslim Network TV, John.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here today.
Okay. Professor John Esposito is professor of many things. Normally, people are professor of one thing. He's professor of religion and international affairs, as well as professor of Islamic Studies at the Georgetown University. John Esposito is founding director of Al-Walid Center for Muslim Christian understanding, and the Bridge Initiative protecting pluralism, ending Islamophobia in the Walsh School of Foreign Service. He is past president of American Academy of Religion and Middle Eastern Studies Association of North America, and he has served many in a consulting position, many governments, especially the U.S. Department of State. Wow, how a Catholic got into Islam so much, John?
Well, the irony is that I had no interest in Islam when I went to graduate school. I had been in a monastery, and then I had become a young Catholic theologian and teacher in Pennsylvania. And I wanted to get a doctorate, and Temple University had a doctorate where you could major in one religion and minor in two. And I thought I would major in Catholicism to finish my PhD. But we were required to take a course in world religions, all the students, a one-year course. Buddhism. And so I was going to do a dissertation in Hinduism, and the chair said, why don't you take some courses in Islam? And I said, why? Why would I do that? I didn't have much of an interest in it. I was young, married, wanted to finish my degree. This was the late 60s, early 70s, raised in New York. And I had all kinds of, to the extent that I knew anything, there were stereotypes about Arabs, etc. But I took a course with Ismail al-Faruqi, Palestinian, and basically that changed the rest of my life, the trajectory, the rest of my life.
Wow, that's a powerful professor who can change somebody's trajectory of life.
But he educated me for unemployment, because when I finished my degree, there were no jobs in the US. There was maybe one job. And so he said to me, he could get me a job in Gaddafi's Libya, or he could get me one in apartheid South Africa. And I said, I really don't think I want to do that at this point. I'm young, married. And then it wasn't until the Iranian Revolution that my career took off and I could work on Islam. Before that, I basically was a professor teaching world religions because I was trained in that. So it's really, and I would say that America's encounter began with the Iranian Revolution.
So you're very thankful to Khomeini. Did you write him a letter of thank you or send him some card or something?
Well, it's funny. I often say that I owe my career, my first Lexus, to the Ayatollah.
So Ayatollah may not have a Lexus, you got one.
Right, that's right, absolutely.
Okay, so how do you work? 55 books, including editing an encyclopedia on Islam. How do you discipline that much? Did they put you on some sort of diet on a monastery?
I think that part of what happened was that when I was in the monastery, we used to get up every day at 4:55 a.m. So it became part of my DNA to be able to do that. And so after my wife and I were married, I found it easy to get up very early. And so for many years, I would get up at 5 o'clock. We would go out and exercise, and I could be at my desk very early in the morning. And it was disciplined late into the night. I don't operate quite that way these days. I get up early, but I knock off at 5 o'clock, 5:30. But in the old days, I would, have these very long hours. So I was very, very lucky, and I had lots of opportunities. I was blessed. So, I never thought I would publish a book in my career. And when I saw that first book, it was like when somebody has a baby, or at least they have another baby, whatever, So for me, it was, seeing my name on the spine of a book. I'm first generation to go to college. This was an incredible experience.
Well, as a person who has written only one published books, I'm just amazed that you have written 55. That requires quite a bit of discipline. So monastery in some way helped you.
Yeah, no, I think the monastery did in terms of even more than that. It reinforced some of the better virtues that came from my parents and that what I grew up with. My sense of a lot of different things of justice, of equity, etc. But there's also a downside to monastic life. It was a positive thing, but after X number of years, I just felt that although I wanted to move on to ordination as a priest, I knew that I didn't want to spend my whole life doing that. And so the idea that I'd wind up where I am now, given my background for so many years, I'd wanted to be a priest from the 3rd grade in grammar school. It was a big adjustment, but I'm very grateful to a lot of people.
I mean, you mentioned parents and you mentioned justice and equity. I mean, that's prophetic. I mean, as you probably know, there is a verse in the Quran that God sent all the prophets for one purpose, to help people establish al-qist, which is justice, fairness, and equity. So it is a prophetic call. Now, spending so many years in Islamic studies and connected with the international affairs and all that, so what is your reflection on the current state of Islamic studies in the United States?
Well, I think in terms of Islamic studies itself, it has grown enormously. What a lot of people aren't aware of is that, for example, the Middle East Studies Association very rarely in the old days had any panels that dealt with Islam, certainly that dealt with Islam in the world today, because in those days, in the 60s, 70s, even into the 80s, there was a sense of secularization, and modernization. And so, as one social scientist put it, the choice was between Mecca and mechanization. The Academy of Religions had no, it was of the major world religions, but it was mostly Judaism, Christianity, and then Buddhism and Hinduism. And then finally, Faruqi and some of his graduate students, including me, petitioned to have Islam admitted, as it were, and represented. Well, today, if you go to an AAR meeting, there are just, panels and panels over numbers of days that deal with various aspects of Islam, Muslim life, Islam in society. So it's a much different world in terms of that. On the other hand, we're still living at a time when, to everybody's, at least to my surprise, the result of 9/11 and after 9/11 and the growth of Islamophobia with some of the people that you mentioned, that has really turned it into a place where Islamophobia became normalized. In newspapers, people could say and write anything that they wanted. As I like to put it, if you took some pieces that people could write about and you put in another religion when they attack Islam, take Islam out and put Judaism or Catholicism, etc., it would be unheard of for an editor to touch some of these stories. And I think where we are today, the growth of violence, in recent years, it began to grow significantly during the Obama administration, but certainly with President Trump, it's gone through the roof, as has a lot of this sort of hate view of the world. Anti-Semitism has gone up. So that's the other side of the coin.
So if Islamic studies, you're saying, is a field has grown, has the study of Islamophobia at the university grown in the same way? Because the people probably are realizing what's going on in the society.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think if you actually look now, I did a book, an edited volume with a colleague called Islamophobia and the Challenge of Pluralism in the 21st Century. There weren't too many books appearing at that time. Edward Said had dealt with this issue and a number of others. Now, if you look up Islamophobia on Amazon, you'll see an awful lot of books have been published and have come out. It's getting that visibility that's important. That's why we created the Bridge. And fortunately, on the Bridge now, we have about 1.2 million followers. And it can make a difference. Our whole sense was that Islamophobia has become so accepted by significant percentages of people, certainly very clearly if you look at the percentages with regard to, I hate to say this, but a significant number of people in the Republican Party, and certainly influenced by President Trump, who said Islam hates us, not Muslim extremists hate us, who put in the Muslim ban, etc. And if we look across the world, as you noted, it's now become global. You have Islamophobia in countries where there aren't any Muslims, or very few, like Hungary and Poland.
So what aspects of Islamic studies do you think are still not fully developed, or you think people need to be studying in those particular areas?
Well, I think that it's important. to pursue a number of areas. We do have a growing number of scholars, both Muslim and non-Muslim. For example, in Quranic studies and the study of Hadith, we do have a growing number of people who write on Islam in various aspects. But we also have at the same time, because it's become a popular topic, many social scientists, whereas in the old days, in international relations, etc., social scientists felt no need to deal with religion and its role in politics and society. Now that's become a booming area. In contrast, often in Islamic studies, it took a while before people were looking at the modern period, and really focusing there. It was a much more tradition and history kind of view and perception and approach. So that it's only been in relatively recent years where you see scholars who are trained in religion and can deal with the issue of politics. But I think it's important that people be grounded and know the religious tradition well in order to address certain kinds of issues. Like if you see violence, is this something that's endemic, to Muslims and Islam? I mean, I've been in the field for 40 years and for many years asked the same basic questions. What is Islam? Is Islam a particularly violent religion? Issues about the life of the Prophet Muhammad. It's taken a long time to begin to break through that, but we still have significant problems in public space. Look at the numbers of members of Congress during both the Obama period, right down to the Trump period, whether they were running for Congress or they were presidential candidates, who would bring Islam up as an issue. Somebody who's running for president would say, well, he didn't know if he could have a Muslim in his cabinet unless he denied his religion, or certainly unless he denied any kind of belief in Sharia, in Islamic law. So we have a long way to go in terms of, I think, the training and in the profession. On the other hand, one of the really positive things is that the last time we hired, or 2 times ago, when we hired, all of our finalists were Muslim scholars. Now, that took decades to get to that point, where you had enough younger Muslims going into that field, training, etc., and becoming scholars, so that you have both Muslim and non-Muslim scholars of Islam.
You're watching Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. I'm talking with Professor John Esposito, and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. I'm talking with Professor John Esposito, and you're watching Muslim Network TV on Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and many other places. Professor, you mentioned that before the break that there are, when you're looking for new people, a lot of finalists are Muslims themselves, and that's what that was not the case before. I have also observed there are multiple seminaries in the Muslim community, and I find a lot of young people who want to study Islam. And do you think the supply is going to be higher than the demand itself? Are these departments and schools properly funded to have such a supply?
Well, I think that there are a couple of things. I think if a young person comes to me for advice, I will tell them what I think are some of the top programs in the country. And I think that some of the newer experiments and approaches in terms of having more of a kind of seminary approach, if you will, or madrasa, some of them have the ability in terms of the number of faculty and the quality, and others don't. That's not meant as to be a negative put down, but you need significant resources, to build a school. And I think that some places have those resources and others just don't. So that a fair number of people who are out and are, if you will, competitive on the market, actually, come from, if you will, non-Muslim universities, in the U.S. and overseas.
So, so you advise them to continue to go to school for Islamic studies, or you say, well, why don't you do double major, study this, study that? I mean, what is going to be job market like?
Oh, I always say do a double major. I say the same thing to people who are in Middle East and Arab studies. The only difference is that as a result of 9/11 and the aftermath of 9/11, that caused a tremendous boom in language studies and in Middle East studies and in Islamic studies. So there you had big programs. I can remember a time at Georgetown when, even though they were putting multiple sections of Arabic, in the week or two before the beginning of the semester, there'd be a panic because they still had more students coming in, and I think that is changing in a number of ways. Number one, in American academia, as you know, there's been real shrinking in the humanities as compared to an emphasis in some quarters on science and the social sciences. And that's affected the size of some departments in universities and whatnot. And I think that the fact that we're now getting at a distance and there are other kinds of hot areas, for example, today, a kid that's looking for a hot area might think about studying Chinese, might be focusing more on China or India, than maybe on the Middle East. But we still get quite a few students. But I've noticed a tapering off in the last few years.
So one of the most recent book which you have is on Sharia. I mean, in the United States, there were at one time, there will always be 30, 40 different laws being presented to different state houses. And the first law actually was signed by Kansas governor, who is now ambassador at large for the religious freedom around the world. Professor, I'm calling him Ambassador Brownback, who used to be senator and governor in Kansas and all that. We don't hear much about those bills. Do you think this Sharia vogue, which was so much focused of Islamophobes, that is withered away, or do you think that will come back anytime soon?
I think the risk is, first of all, there have been at least 120 attempts to pass these kinds of bills. And then at certain points, when they realized that simply identifying Sharia could be a problem, they would say foreign laws to get that out. The reality of it is, though, that a number of states have signed off on that. Texas, Florida. So, there are a number that have signed off on it.
Yeah, close to 9, I think, who have signed on those things.
But at the end of the day, the real question in terms of our politics is, what will the politics look like? Certainly, in the coming elections, there'll be a lot of issues. But one of the issues that's going to come up on the part of, I'm sure, the president will be, in addition to his denunciation now of just about everybody who's not him. So it would be, the liberal Democrats, but it's also going to be the idea of immigrants, which he still brags about that he's keeping them out. On the other hand, one has to point out that just yesterday, the House passed a bill that had to do with no ban addressing the Muslim ban. But you're pretty sure, I would be shocked if the Senate went along with that, given the influence of both Trump and Mitch McConnell. So this could become another issue, in the near future. And I think it's coming up even in the elections now, the congressional elections, when it comes to a number of the Muslims that were elected to the House, particularly the 2 women that were elected to the House in the last elections.
Yeah, Rashida Tlaib is struggling for her life. Most likely, she's the first Palestinian American and, of course, Muslim who was very strong about the impeachment of Trump. I mean, she is in difficult condition, although she was the early supporter for the No Muslim Ban Ever coalition. We are part of that coalition as well. Tell me, I mean, you know, Saudis are in the news for bad things substantially, and the person who who respected you enough when you founded the Center for Muslim Christian Understanding at Georgetown in 1993 and became its founding director. So, what Saudi Prince Al Walid bin Talal invested 20 million endowment for that particular program. So how you and Georgetown work now under a Saudi connection type of a thing, although that Walid himself, I think, have been in some sort of a prison or something there for a while.
Well, Al Walid is a very interesting person. As you probably know, right after 9/11, he went to the site and he presented Rudy Giuliani with a check, for support, to express support. In a private note that he wrote to him, he mentioned, which is true, that one of the issues that we're going to have to deal with globally that can lead to radicalization is the issue of Palestine, and Palestine and Israel, etc. Giuliani went public, rejected the check, etc. What got blocked out when people reported at that time and after is that Al Walid was very concerned about the understanding of the Arab world, of America, and the reverse. Among other reasons, Al Walid did his undergraduate degree on the West Coast. He did a master's degree at Syracuse University. He dealt with American and Western businessmen all the time. So at the end of the day, he wound up supporting American studies at American University of Cairo and at the American University in Beirut. And then in the States, he supported at Harvard and Georgetown the study of Islam, Muslim-Christian relations. And then he also supported two in the UK. Now, our funding came in from Al Walid, maybe 9 years ago. I forget, 9 or 10 years ago. And he's always been very supportive, but always detached. He always said to me from the very beginning, whatever you want to do, you do. He was not a donor who stayed in touch a lot. He was not a donor who said, I have a relative or a friend of my relative wants to go to Georgetown. Can you get him an appointment with the president, etc. So, in fact, it's still interesting that the Islamophobes love to talk about the Saudi funding, of our center at Georgetown. What they really want to say is, and they do, they don't like what we say. We don't buy into their hate agenda when it comes to Islam and Muslims. And so it's an attempt to discredit. Having said that, I think, and one should remember that Al Walid was among the prominent businessmen who were arrested and held for quite a few months. And at least as media reports have it, they were released when, in fact, they gave significant amounts of money to the government, that is, to the Crown Prince. I'm talking about billions of dollars each in some cases. And there are issues, I think, today when one looks at some of the ways in which the current government has been operating, both certainly on the international stage. Yemen's a good example, but there are others. The support for Sisi, in fact, even in the planning, let alone after he came to power in a coup d'état. So there's that other side of the coin, but that complicates the whole situation. Saudis in general are not responsible necessarily for what their government does, but when we get into the media use of it, it is a difficulty. And under this administration, with the Secretary of Education, there's been a real move to really an aggressive move with regard to centers of Arab studies, Middle East studies, and also those that deal with Islam.
You're watching Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with Professor John Esposito. And you're watching us on Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and other social media. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with Professor John Esposito. John, you have this center, Christian Muslim Understanding. Has understanding between two religions improved somewhat as a result of the efforts put forth by the Institute?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think that, I was very lucky when we began it, and this was under an early Adona, Hasib Sabad. I had an open situation in terms of being able to hire, some of the really prominent scholars in the field who are out there. And as a result, over the years that we've existed since 1993, we've published an enormous number of books and articles, done an incredible amount of media work, and most of us traveled, many miles. I've chalked up close to 3 million miles in my career, anyway, for Georgetown. And so I think that we've been very much out there, and I think we've had an impact. But of course, I mean, the impact comes from an awful lot of other people, first-rate scholars in the U.S. And in Europe, and a number of them in the Muslim world, particularly if they write in English, in terms of then, having that impact. So it's much different. I mean, Mujahid, you would remember it was only, maybe 20 years ago, you could go into a bookstore and see a wall of books on Christianity, a wall on Judaism, and you'd be lucky if you found one or two books, maybe a Quran.
Those will be anti-Muslim to begin with.
Yeah.
And I have physically done that, John. I have gone to bookstores, as normally I go places to enjoy along with garden or bookstore. And I will look at it, and you're saying exactly what I observed.
And what's happened with the rise of Islamophobia, many of them, Robert Spencer and others, would make it, to the, bestseller list, because they write these provocative things, and they're writing, quote unquote, about an enemy. And it was amazing. It's tapered off quite a bit, but for a number of years, the more bizarre the book, and with no looking at what's the background and training of the person that's writing, it really took off in that way. But at least now, when you're talking about going on Amazon, or going to bookstores, but particularly, you'll see lots and lots of books on Islam, and many of them are really done by reputable scholars, and it's really good. But as I say, in the old days, it was hard even coming up with materials. When I first got involved, a lot of my books came about because I was teaching, and I suddenly saw we don't have a collection of the writings of Muslims on all of these things. So I did, Islam in Transition, or Voices of Resurgent Islam, and brought together scholars to kind of fill that kind of gap. And there's been a good group of people coming out of a number of universities in the U.S. That have been very involved. Duke, North Carolina, University of Chicago, Harvard, Santa Barbara, and sorry, some of my friends, because I can't remember their university right now.
Well, I mean, you're correct. To prepare for this show, I went to Amazon, and about 7-8 years ago, I will go on Amazon, I will top bestseller on Islam, and sometime out of top 10, there will be 7-8 by Robert Spencer.
Yeah.
This morning when I went there, I couldn't find a single one of these which is a bestseller at this moment among the top 10 one. So I think things have changed. I used to, before any time I will speak 6, 7, 8 years ago, I will check Amazon bestseller list. I will share with the people that, hey, this is what I found. And so these people have faded away. So that impact is definitely there. There was some letter which came out, what was it called? A common word between Muslims and Christians. And there was quite a bit, I don't remember any initiative by Muslims in the world which has gotten so much positive traction. What was that phenomena? What happened? And is it still part of discourse somewhere?
It came at a good time, and in the sense that when it was brought out, it was put together, came out of Jordan. Prince Ghazi oversaw that project. A number of us were involved in it, you early on had, I think it was in the New York Times, a list of, I don't know what, 100, 200 professors of religion and Islamic studies that were signing off on the importance of something like a common word between us and you. The message was coming from a group of Muslim scholars, and you could do it in an age of globalization with globalization and communications. You could have a cross-section of Muslim scholars across the world, basically coming behind a document that basically said, we have our differences between the two religions, but we share a lot in common, and we also share a lot in an age of globalization. And so both for religious reasons and because we're concerned about the safety and security of our societies, we need to come together. And what do we share in common? And love of God and love of neighbor. It's part of our scriptures. And they backed it up. If you go to the website for a common word, you'll see incredible documentation from the Bible and from the Quran. Then when it was launched, they launched it both at Yale, at Cambridge University in the UK, and at Georgetown. At Yale, they did theology and had people from all over the world. Cambridge, they did scripture. And at Georgetown, we did the kind of so what and where does it go from here? In other words, the whole question of social impact. And I think it got a lot of run. It affected a lot of people, and there were places that people would write to you and say that they were using it. People in the Philippines, even in the southern Philippines, etc. But I think after a while, it lost some of that drive because people moved on to other things. And when you want to have something as a movement, you need to have people who stay with that movement rather than move to another movement. And it takes financing. So, for example, we have this bridge initiative, which is run for about 5 years. Well, to do that, you need to fundraise for your budget every year. And you can have a booming situation. We were quoted just yesterday in the Huffington Post with regard to the story on Congress passing this no ban. Okay. And we've got, as I said before, 1.2 million followers. But you need for that to continue to go, not just that you have success and you've got the researchers, but the funding has to keep coming in. And that becomes critical. And so I think that's what's affected a lot of very good projects that they become part of, if you will, history, as in recent history or past history.
Tell us a little more about Bridges. Bridges, I keep calling Bridge program. Is it connected with the Christian Muslim Understanding Department, or is it an independent project?
No, it's very much. It's part of the center. I basically created it when I was as director, the idea, and did the fundraising, director of the center. And then when colleagues took over, Jonathan Brown, one of our Muslim scholars, and now Tamara San, I moved over and became director of Bridge along with Tamara San. And I think, if people go there, what it's valuable for is we have somebody who every day, who's based in Europe, but looks at the world, and Mubashara looks at the world and reports every day on, let's say, the top 10, 20 stories that deal with Muslims and that raise the question of Islamophobia. We have articles, we have podcasts, we have videos, but we also have a section that a lot of people like and quote, a lot of media people, what we call fact sheets. So, when you read an article, you can always say, well, wait a minute, that's the author's opinion, and there are some quotes. Our fact sheets are just facts. So if you go there, you will see fact sheets written on some of the top organizations and individuals who promote Islamophobia globally. You will see coverage of the current administration and its major players, from the president to the vice president to the secretary of state, and to many people who've held senior appointments in this administration. And they just give you the facts. Are these people who have addressed Islam and Muslims? And if so, what have they said? What have they done? What do they do? And we do that for the US, we do it for Europe, and we do it for other parts of the world. So it really is a go-to place. We have interviews with important people, and I advise them to go to the website. It's packed with information, and every day there's an update. So every day you can update and know that you can find those stories. When you look at our media, we've got so much media coverage, but if you want to deal with any area, any country, if you want to know what's happening with Rohingya, with the Uyghurs, what's going on in India, etc., you have to count on whether or not on a particular day, and this newspaper or that one that you might be reading is carrying it. Here you can go to a site and pretty much see what are the top pieces that are coming out.
You go, talk to a lot of State Department, and you were on the World Economic Forum's Council of 100 Leaders and EU's European Network of Experts on Radicalization and things like that. What were the questions people used to ask 5 years ago, and how those questions have changed? Are the people still busy about talking radicalization, or it is some other things?
Oh, radicalization is very much there. I can remember, years go by so fast. My mom said, when you get older, the years go by fast, as opposed to when you're a kid, they seem so long. And she's right, Sometimes I look up somebody that I kind of knew who was an actor who passed away. And also I turn to my wife and go, oh my God, that was 15 years ago. But I would say about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe a little more than that, I was talking to an ambassador at the UN. And he was trying to bring attention to Palestine and Israel at the time. And he said, all people want to talk about is CVE, combating violent extremism. And so that has remained a major thing. Classic example is when President Trump went to Saudi Arabia. Many people expected that, given what he said about Islam and Muslims, that, why is he going there? And, what's he going to say? The president went there and basically said, we can have a close relationship on two things. What does he want? Big business. We want big contracts from Saudi Arabia, and fighting radicalism and extremism. So that's a major kind of issue that one is asked when you're talking any place, whether it's the EU or you're talking to governments in Europe or in Asia. In fact, I remember a funny one from here. This was a senior member of government in an Asian country. I won't mention the country. And he said he wanted to see me. And I came in and he said, no notes. I have 5 questions for you. And he remembered his 5 questions. First question was, why would anybody become a Muslim? Now, he was in a country where you had a minority Muslim population. And I don't know if that was his reason, but I said to him, I said, nobody's ever quite asked me that, who's a government person. But certainly the kinds of questions that are there. I mean, people ask you also to tell you more about Islam, what are Muslims like, etc. But that which catches people, look, what's going to catch a media story? A media story is going to be about whether or not the person who's being interviewed can talk about acts of violence and terrorism. Now, today, it can also be whether or not it's done against Muslims. But in the past, it would be more the brushstroking of a majority of mainstream Muslims by the very, terrible things that occurred with 9/11 and with many other things in the world. So, but it's still there, there's still that side of it. But they'll ask about women in Islam. They'll ask about even why do people, wear a hijab? They won't be aware of the fact that Muslims in America, when it comes to areas of education and many areas, rank right up there with, if you will, the top religions, in the world. Or even when you talk to them about pluralism and diversity, Muslim attitudes about pluralism, at least 3/4 of Muslims, believe that other people, that others worship God in other faiths. They also, they have lots of, they'll talk about, do they have friends who are non-Muslims? And many do, to a percentage that many whites don't. I mean, we're in a country now where white supremacists have really emerged, as in Europe, white supremacism and white nationalism. And so you find that, ironically, a lot of that number, which is a significant minority, they have nothing to do, and they don't want to have anything to do with any immigrants, let alone Jews and Muslims, etc. So, this is a very interesting time to be out there. While the numbers have improved in terms of some positive attitudes among Americans, you have a significant minority that not only are dangerous intellectually, but we've seen when you look at, for example, the Southern Poverty Law Center statistics, the FBI statistics on the number of anti-Muslim and anti-Semitic groups that have grown up, but even more broadly, the number of white supremacist groups. In fact, the head of the FBI said, I think this past year, that was the #1 terrorist threat in the United States.
You just used the word intellectually dangerous. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that there are. I think that, for example, I mean, Islamophobic authors, etc., are intellectually dangerous in what they do. We, for example, at the center have had at times individuals who are hired by some of these organizations who show up for. We've had one in particular who shows up for almost every talk that we give, and then puts out more often than not, a very biased, in fact, distorted representation of what's there. And with the internet, that goes out. And for people, they don't know where to get their information. One of the reasons we started Oxford Islamic Studies Online about 10 years ago was that Oxford, and I became the editor-in-chief, and I wanted to create a portal where people who wanted to have information on Islam, on Muslims, Islamic history, art, etc., could go and know from the very name of the organization, Oxford University and Oxford University Press, that they could trust it. Because if you go on the internet, you see things like family security, you see things, that all have these pajama media, these innocuous kinds of, that are often very anti-foreign, anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, and publish this stuff all of the time. And a number of these organizations are advisors to the current administration. And one or two of them have served in the administration.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Miller, who sits there in the White House, invents almost everything, which is what comes out anti-Muslim or anti-immigrants there.
Well, Mr. Miller worked for David Horowitz.
Yeah. So tell us, what are the positive trends which you see in the Muslim society internationally?
Well, I think in terms of a Muslim society internationally, I'd have to say that what one has to do to understand it today very much is to see, the incredible diversity, and that's positive as well as negative, okay? In terms of development, in terms of attitudes towards education, in terms of gender issues, etc. But certainly one of the things that a lot of people miss are the number of Muslim societies, in terms of education, for example, where women are equal to men, and sometimes more women are graduating with university degrees, and the societies in which women are more and more emerging, in the workplace, and even working in government, but often at lower levels, unless they're lucky enough, as in the recent past, to be the daughter of somebody who was the head of state, and then they succeed. I think also that globalization, in particular the internet, and also globalization of travel, has meant a real, in some countries, a real uptick in terms of their sort of outlook on the world, their connection to the world. It doesn't require that one, as it would 20 or 30 years ago, that to really understand, if you will, another part of the globe, you had to go and study there. Because if you were in your own country, you wouldn't have that kind of exposure. At the same time, there is as I said before, it's a radical side in terms of white supremacism in Europe, but also in terms of anti-Muslim attitudes in India and China, etc. But there's also a hardcore conservatism. Now, this will get some of my conservative friends upset, or if you will, hardcore traditionalists, which can be problematic. It doesn't mean the traditionalists.
You mean hardcore conservative, or among the Muslims you're talking about?
Yeah, Muslims. And I don't mean that in a dangerous sense, but I mean a conservatism that at times can stifle open discussion within their own societies overseas. And I think that becomes an issue. So that if in a number of countries, if you're a reformer, a reformist thinker, it's not a free play of ideas, and you can wind up with groups, for example, of very conservative ulama denouncing something like another group or a group of individuals that are talking about the relationship between Islam and democracy, or talking about improving gender relations.
Dan, we need to conclude, but I still want 1 minute to, we're just coming close to the show time. But about the struggle for democracy, elections, and Islam, which in some way showed up in Arab Spring, and of course people remember Egypt and Syria and Libya, but people forget about all of that. What is happening in Tunis, Morocco, or now in Sudan? Do you think that desire for freedom, democracy, and Islam will continue to come back in another format, or crushing Arab Spring was it?
No, I think it will come back. I think the crushing of the Arab Spring means that there's been an upsurge of authoritarianism. Authoritarian governments have become more authoritarian on the one hand. But if you look at a book called The Future of Islam and Democracy After the Arab Spring, which I did with Oxford with two of my colleagues, we take a different approach when it talks about the future. And there will be a webinar on August 11th that will be out of London that I've put together on this very theme. And so if we'll try to put something on our website to advertise it. But I think in the short term, there definitely has been a shutting down in many societies. And COVID-19 has been used in countries like Algeria and a number of other Muslim countries as an excuse for stopping public discussion, public groups meeting. And so I think that in the short term puts a lot of pressure in a number of countries where there's an attempt to put the lid on really, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and the right for a population to have a say in terms of the kind of government that they have.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Esposito, sparing your 1 hour with us. We learn a great deal, and always very thankful to your work and to your teacher, Faruqi, who put you in a place where there were no jobs. And then finally you got your Lexus.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and we have been talking with Professor John Esposito. You're watching Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and other social media. And we're always on our 24/7 on muslimnetwork.tv. Thank you, Sumaya Haider, for producing our show, and Aliza Majid, who is our intern producer. Peace. Salam.